Yeah, that jacket looks great. Oh. Do you want the modeling light up anymore?
No, it's fine.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, sir, would you please tell us your full name?
Abraham JudahSamet,
And how old are you?
77.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Debrecen, Hungary, 1938, February the 5th.
And what is your religious identity?
I'm a Jew.
Okay, Judah, would you mind just telling us whatever you want to share with us about your personal World War II Holocaust story?
Well, I have a story that I put down on paper in the interest of time, and my story starts in 1944 when the Germans invaded Hungary. And as soon as they invaded Hungary, Eichmann came into Hungary with the Gestapo, and they started to round up the Jews. In Debrecen, there were several thousand Jews there, and we lived in a Jewish neighborhood, and they came noontime. They knew that everybody is at home at that time for lunch, which in Europe was actually the main meal of the day. And they started using megaphones to ask us to leave our homes and take with us our valuables only and a change of underwear. They were taking us to a better place. They gave us 15 minutes, and we all assembled outside, and soon they started to drive us to the railway. It took several hours to get to the railway, and they were already rushing and shoving and pushing people. And if these people could not go fast enough, whether they were sick or old, they beat them with clubs. And after a few hours, we arrived at the railway. And then several thousand Jews came from the countryside. So I imagine the total of the Jews in Debrecen was probably around maybe 6,000-7,000 people. My mother volunteered to cook. Although she was a businesswoman, but she was always a volunteer. They gave her one or two bed tops, and she acquired vegetables from the nearby farmers, all kinds of vegetables, and a little bit meat and some bread. Of course, we paid for it, because mostly everybody had some money, and that was one of the things that the Germans asked to bring when they asked us to leave our homes. She cooked about 4 bed tops a day. She was not the only one. She had help, and we were there for, God knows, I don't exactly know how many days or even how many weeks. After a while, it could have been 2 or 3 weeks or so, the first transport arrived. There would be 2 transports. Each transport could handle around 2,500 to 3,000. And my aunt, with her 6 children, who were there too, they lived in Debrecen too, she started to move towards the train. And my mother begged her not to go. We already knew, not us, children, not children, but my mother and the adults knew where we were going. But she said she can't take the crying of her children. She had 7 children. The oldest one and the father were taken immediately to a labor camp. But the young ones stayed with her, and the hunger already started. The food was not enough for a whole day. So the kids were crying all the time. She couldn't take it anymore, and she did get on the train. And we never saw him again. Later on, in Brooklyn, I met my cousin, the older one. He was half crazed. I wanted to meet his father, my uncle, and he wouldn't let me. He said, "You don't want to see him. He's institutionalized." I guess losing a wife and 6 children is enough to get you crazy. But going back to the train, to the train station, after a few days, a second transport came. And we were all gathered on the platform to get us into the cars. The cars were cattle cars. That means the walls were made of planks that were not straight. They just put enough planks so that the cattle will not run out. In other words, the wind blew through those walls, and in the winter, obviously, it would be ice cold, and in the summer, very, very hot. My mother spoke fluent German. She could read and write, and she spoke very high German. So she became the translator. And she noticed that they were bringing 2 little buckets. One was with water, filled with water, and the other one was for toilet purposes. And my mother addressed the officer, the commandant. There was there a commandant, and with him he had a sergeant, a Gestapo. The Gestapo was dressed all black, and he had 2 lightnings on each side. And then he had a skull on his cap. And the Gestapo, they were chosen for their brutality. They were Hitler's special guards. There were 50,000 of them, and they are the ones who committed all the atrocities. They were not a part of the Wehrmacht, which is the German military. So my mother addressed the officer, by the way, the officer was dressed so nicely that as a child I was very impressed. He impressed me more than our own people. Our own people looked haggard, we were starved, and here is this guy standing there with his hands behind his back and not even looking at anybody. So she told them in German, in very high German, that we know where we are going. That bucket of water is not going to be enough, because that trip between Debrecen and Auschwitz would have taken at least 3-4 days. And if the military needed the railways, sometimes the train would stop for a couple of days. So there's no way this little bucket would have sufficed. So the sergeant, the Gestapo, pulled out his pistol and he put it to my mother's head, ready to shoot. because a Jew was not allowed to address a German. Only if the German asked him a question, he answered. If you addressed a German, especially an officer, they shot you. So the officer, without even looking at him, told him in German, "You Dummkopf, you idiot. Can't you realize if you kill her, we don't have an interpreter. We have nobody to talk to." You see, the difference between the Gestapo and the officer corps was like two different worlds. The officer corps, many of them were titled. They came from high-born families. The Gestapo, many of them were picked from the prisons. Murderers, rapists, and so forth. They were looking for torturers, for people who had no problem with killing somebody. So, next thing my mother noticed that they replaced the bucket of water with an oil drum filled with water. And we started to pack the cars, 60, 70 to each car, which means there was room only for standing room only, or we would be piled on each other if we got so tired that we couldn't stand anymore. And the train started. We were on our way to Auschwitz. Somewhere in Czechoslovakia, the Czech partisans blew up the railways. So the Germans had no other choice but take us back, but not to Hungary. They took us back to Austria. And in Austria, they divided us among different manufacturing plants. We landed with a very large lumber yard. We were not the only ones there. There were some French prisoners of war, and there were some Italians from the south. Northern Italians were pretty much allied with Germany, but the southern Italians were not. And they worked our parents 12, 14 hours a day, hard labor, fed them very little. They didn't feed them the same thing they fed the French and the Italian. The French and the Italian were given prisoner of war portions. One night, after work, my mother went to a neighboring farm, and she talked to the farmers there, and she told them that she will knit clothes for their babies. I didn't tell you that we were in the knitting business. We had 2 factories, and my mother could knit, could do anything, doilies, anything with her hands. She even made a Persian carpet once in Israel when she was sick for 4 weeks. So anyhow, and for that, all they had to do is buy yarn, and she did the rest. She would bring back to us some cheese, some eggs, some bread, some milk, enough to sustain us. One night she didn't come home, and we were very worried, because the orders by Hitler was that any Jew who comes in any contact with any German or Austrian, where they became allies, has to be shot on the spot. And also the German or Austrian who dealt with a Jew has to be shot too. She didn't come home. We were worried. A few days passed by and we really panicked, because my mother was the heart and soul of the family. She was 4 feet 10, but she stood 10 feet tall. She was a beautiful woman, very smart. Actually, I would say brilliant, not just smart. She's the one who created the business. My father was a phenom in Jewish studies, but anything he knew about the factories was, my mother told him. The only thing that he excelled besides studies was that he knew how to fix the machines. He learned how to fix the machines. So we never needed anybody from outside. So she didn't come home. we were really panicked, and we didn't know what to do. We thought that she's probably dead. She got shot, and without her, we'll all die. She was, I always like to compare her to an eagle who spread her wings and protecting her family. And one day she did show up. We didn't want to ask her too many. We asked her what happened, and she told us that somebody squealed, and they sent a squad with a lieutenant, a German. He was young, very handsome, and maybe that was the reason why my mother wasn't dead, wasn't killed. But she was in jail, and in jail she shared a room with an Austrian girl, beautiful, beautiful girl. And the reason she was in jail is because Hitler ordered all young, beautiful girls between 18 or maybe 16 and 25 to entertain the German soldiers coming home on furlough. They came home from the Soviet front, and they came home from the West fighting the Allies, and they came home for a few days, and Hitler wanted them to be entertained. And this girl evidently had high morals, and she wouldn't do it. So they put her in jail. They hung her. They killed her. And somehow my mother came back. We never asked her questions. In fact, at the age of 82, we buried her in Jerusalem with her secret. So we were back together. Of course, she couldn't go back outside anymore. In a few days, transportation arrived and picked us up, and we were on our way to Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen is in a lower Silesia, I think it's called. It's close to Hanover. It's about maybe 300 miles from the Northern Sea. So it would be somewhere around parallel to northern Canada, maybe even Alaska. And we arrived there in June, sometime in June of 1944. I cannot tell you about dates, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Those things I don't remember. So I'm just not, I never talk about a calendar or anything like that. The first thing we noticed when we arrived in Bergen-Belsen, that at the gate there was a pile of corpses, like 2-3 stories high. There were about 12 to 1,500 corpses there. They would clear them during the day. You got up in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, to count, to be counted. There was a new pile. So it was going on every single day, as long as we were in Bergen-Belsen. The situation in Bergen-Belsen was, excuse me, very, very bad, because we were on a starvation diet. We were 6 of us, my mother, my father, my 2 brothers, my sister and I, and we had my grandparents on my mother's side, my grandfather and grandmother, and my mother's brother. And how did my brother and my mother's brother escape from going to labor camp is because my mother convinced the Germans that she has 4 children and a sick husband to take care of. She cannot handle her father and mother. They are sick too, and they needed their son. And you know, my mother never raised her voice, and she was very respectful when she talked to you, but she was very convincing, because to convince them not to take my uncle, to me till today I don't understand. It's a miracle that she was able to do that. As I said before, she was a brilliant woman. By the way, in my family she was the disciplinarian. I remember my brother in Hungary, Tibi. You see, our Hungarian names was, the old one was Paul, And Yaakov, who was about 13 months older than I, his name was Tibor. We called him Tibi. My name was Imre. And my sister was Marika. So anyhow, my father was chasing my brother Tibi around the table. My mother happened to be at home. She got out of the kitchen and she said, Tibi, come here. So with his head down, he came straight to her and she gave him 2 light slaps on his face first. And then she said, now what did you do? That was my mother.
Just
The
two,
slaps first.
just 2 light ones?
2 light ones. She never hurt you. She never hurt you. I always said we were afraid of my mother, but not physical fear. We were afraid to disappoint her. And when she closed her eyes and lowered her voice, because she never raised her voice, we knew she was disappointed. And that was the biggest punishment that we could have had. And it was like that all the time. So in Bergen-Belsen, we were given a small black rock-hard bread that was the size of a small cantaloupe. And that was supposed to be enough for the 6 of us for the rest of the day. And we also got a little soup. Actually, it was water with a little color to it. That was supposed to be soup. And that's what we ate all day. That was the meal for 24 hours. And actually, they kept making the bread a little bit smaller all the time. So it was a starvation diet. And that's what really killed. Not the starvation itself, but when you starve for a long time, it affects your immunity system. It kills your immunity system. And when you don't have any immunity system, there are 2 things usually that happen to you. Either you have dysentery, where you cannot keep down anything. The minute it goes in, it comes down. And the second is typhoid. And they're both killers. And the situation was so bad, hygiene-wise, there was no hygiene in the camps, period. There was no such thing that a woman would cover all her body because her clothes were probably in tatters. There was no separate bathrooms. Most people didn't make it to the bathroom. The whole camp was like a big toilet. They did clean it. There was what they call the Judenrat. The Germans appointed a Jewish committee. And they were in charge of everything. And they just grabbed people, do this, do that. They themselves were very cruel. They picked them good. And they did a lot of beating and so forth. But you could understand it to some point, because if they didn't do their job well, they would be shot. Or they would at least lose their position on the Judenrat. And the Judenrat had some privileges. For instance, the best part of the soup was on the bottom, and they got to share in it. And my mother actually threatened the head of the Judenrat that if it doesn't stop doing it and dividing the food between the sick people who need it, then she'll see to it that after the war, he's going to be tried on war crimes. So normally, if it was my mother, he would find a way to kill her. But because she was the interpreter, and if the commandant came and wanted to tell something, so he would ask the head of the Judenrat, where is the interpreter? And if he started to mumble, he would shoot him, because there was another one waiting to be the head of the Judenrat. So the situation, as far as corpses go, people kept dying all day long. Some of them just lay down and died. It came to a point where we were all so weak that we tried to do shortcuts. So to get to the bathroom or to go to another place, what we would do, just walk over the dead, over the corpses, like they were a piece of the earth. By the time I was 7 years old, by then I turned 7, I've seen more dead than life. I did meet in the camp a little boy my age. In fact, I never knew. I thought we were the only children, the four of us. Later on, I found out that there were actually 275. And they, of course, not all of them survived. So we used to go around the camp all the time, foraging, looking for something to eat. And we found out that if we stood by the mess hall of the officers had their own mess hall. They were well fed. And they would come out of the mess hall after they finished. They would walk in twos, and they would always chew on something. And when they finished, they'd drop it to the ground, and the two of us would jump on whatever they dropped on the ground. Most of the time there was not much left on it except for the taste. And that taste was actually enough, you know. It stayed with us for a couple hours or so. And I cannot tell you that I remember. I remember the face a little bit, but I don't remember his name. After the war, we were separated. So there was a Hungarian guard. You know, the Hungarians were allied with the Germans, and he was on the tower, and he started to talk to us in Hungarian. So we thought, oh, here we have a friend. So we went toward the tower, so he started shooting between our feet. You know, so we knew not to come close. But that was our first experience with somebody actually shooting at you. And we were both 7 years old at the time. Now, we were there for about 10 and a half months in the camp. The war was almost over, so the Germans came in and they wanted 2,500 people. My mother jumped on the opportunity. She wanted to get out of Bergen-Belsen because of the head of the Judenrat. And the situation there became so bad that it was actually hell. So we went on the train. We did not know where the train is going. And the train would stop every few days to unload the dead, because people were dying all the time. When we left the train for a half an hour or so, we noticed that on top of each car there was a German soldier with an anti-aircraft machine gun. As the American Air Force were looking for trains carrying ammunition from Germany to the Russian front or wherever they were fighting. And if they knew that it was an ammunition train, they would destroy it. They were not sure about our train. And I don't know how long we were on the train. I understand we were quite a while, quite a few weeks. They were looking for a place where they could finish us off. As I said, the train would stop every few days to unload the dead. And this time the train stopped, and there was an elderly fellow right next to me, laying, who was dead. He was dead for a few days. They took him off, they took him down, and when we went back to the train, I was very upset, because he was my pillow, and he was also my cover. You know, he was bigger than I, so he took the brunt of the cold wind, because this was already sometime in February or so, and as I told you, we were up north, very far north in Germany, very close to the Northern Sea, and the sea where Sweden is, and I can't think of the name right now. Sweden and Denmark, that sea. So, and by then our clothes were tattered, holes in the shoes, and we didn't have a change. We didn't have any change. I had a little coat, and that was all torn, and so forth. So the train kept stopping. We kept going. I remember going through Berlin. There was not one single building standing. You saw the walls. The windows were blown out, and the roofs were missing. And so the train stopped, the doors were opened, we went out, and there were no soldiers. In fact, the last time we saw, they were not typical soldiers. Their Hitler Jugend. They were all teenagers because, you know, almost 2 million German soldiers died, between 2 and 3 million, so there were not many soldiers left. And Hitler did not want to finish the war. He said, till the last one standing. So that here's the place where they finally going to finish us, the bastards. And sure enough, we heard the rumbling of a tank. And when the tank came out, the turret was not aimed at us, not at the train. It was aimed to the side. The door of the turret opened, and a soldier came out, and he did not have the Nazi uniform. So my father, who was studying English already, knowing that we are going to America, he yelled Americans. And that was how we got saved. And of course, the one who came out of the turret, his name was, he was a Jew. And he came from Brooklyn, and almost every Jew in Europe had some relatives in Brooklyn. So he seemed to know everybody. Also, he distributed candy. Now, candy could have been a big problem. He didn't give too much, just one piece. A lot of prisoners died after the war from overeating because they did not have any system in their body to accommodate food. Their stomachs were shrunk to nothing, and everything leading to the stomach. So many of them died because of that, many thousands. And many more thousands died from typhoid after liberation. Unfortunately, my father was one of them. My grandfather also contracted typhoid, but he survived. But he died. And anyhow, when the tank came, we all returned to the train, and they took us to Hillersleben. It was about an hour and a half, 2 hours from where they liberated us. And we noticed that there was the Rhine River was very broad at that place, and there was a huge bridge, but the bridge was bombed out. And the plan was to push us into the Rhine with the doors were closed, where the doors were closed, so there was no way out, and that's how they would finish us. The end of the war, what they tried to do is kill all the witnesses. They tried very hard, and they managed to kill quite a few thousand. But eventually, we were liberated. Now, going back to Bergen-Belsen, Bergen-Belsen was liberated by the British. And they found actually 13,000 corpses on the ground, all over the camp. There was a debate. At first they said that only 13,000 died in Bergen-Belsen. Then I saw a figure of 37,000, and I said it's impossible. It had to be many, many more, because you had almost 1,200 a day for 12 months or so, for 10 and a half months or so. But whatever. There was a soldier, a British soldier. This woman ran to him with a bundle. She threw the bundle at him, said, "Give him milk." And she ran away. She was screaming. She was crazy. She lost it. And the soldier opened the thing, and there was a baby who was dead already for a few days. In Bergen-Belsen, as the military came in, they were accompanied by a war correspondent. The soldiers were numb. What they saw, they couldn't believe it. So anyhow, he sent back a report to his home office. I think his name was Dimbledy or something like that. And he said that if all the heavens were paper, all the trees pens, and all the oceans were ink, it wouldn't be enough to describe what he saw in Bergen-Belsen. It seemed like hell itself descended upon Bergen-Belsen. He was close, but not close enough. It was much worse. I don't think Dante's Inferno could have been much worse than what was going on. Bergen-Belsen is also the camp that is used more or less, Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. Auschwitz for killing and Bergen-Belsen for human depravity. And in fact, if you go to Yad Vashem in Israel, the Holocaust Center, and there is a tombstone the size of my living room in the kitchen, and you have there 10 camps. I don't remember the first, but the next one to it is Bergen-Belsen. And at the very end, on the top by itself, no, together actually, Auschwitz and Treblinka. See, in Auschwitz, if you arrived in Auschwitz, and you were a child, you were an old person, you were a woman, and after they selected only those who could do something, then you were there for maybe 30 minutes. After 40 minutes, you came out to the smokestacks. You were dead within 40 minutes. So if people ask, well, what was worse, Bergen-Belsen or Auschwitz? I would hate to live with that fear. Of course, I was too young to understand that fear. But let's say my mother or my father, to live with that fear even for 40 minutes, not knowing what's going to happen. But in Bergen-Belsen, you knew what's going to happen. You're going to be dead within 6 months if you stay there. Maybe even not that much, because the typhoid or the dysentery would have taken you much faster. So in Hillersleben, we were separated from my mother, and they took us to Paris. There was the American Joint Distribution. There was a Jewish charity. They're still around, and they do work actually around the world. And they put us in a very fancy hotel, the Grand Hotel, and after a week or so, first they took us, all the major newspapers came, and they put our pictures, the four of us, and then by myself, on the front page, because we were the first Jewish children to be saved by the Americans. After a few weeks, they took us to a pension, like a little fancy hotel, where they fed us, and they built up our physique, our bodies. And being there for a couple of months or so, maybe a little longer, they took us to Marseille, which is on the Mediterranean Sea, southern France. And after a few weeks there, or a few days maybe, they put us on a ship to Israel. And we arrived in Israel. And I think basically that's the story that you want to hear, the Holocaust. Now what happened to me in Israel is I went to school, high school, then I went to the military. I was a combat radio man and a paratrooper. And when I finished my service after 2.5 years, I worked for the government. I ran a couple small towns. And then my uncle, who actually went to Canada, he came to visit his parents, so he took my sister and I to Canada, to Toronto. I was there a short while, didn't like it, it was too cold. I was there in February, it was very, very cold. And I ended up here in Pittsburgh, which is colder. You see, the snow doesn't stick in Toronto very long because of the Ontario lake. It sits on the lake.
Yeah.
So,
So
is that enough, or you want to hear more?
Yeah, I just have a few more questions. That was very good. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So what year did you first come to the U.S.?
1961.
1961. And what was your first job when you came here?
I worked for my cousins. They were also in the camps. But we were in Israel, and we were there a few years. I was there from 1946 till 1961. So I arrived in the United States at the age of 25. My cousins, not the same ones, they all, another uncle. My father actually was one of 7. I think 2 girls and 5 boys. So they had a coat factory, inexpensive coats, and I worked there for a while, and I also attended the Jewish Theological Seminary. And my aunt, that is my uncle's wife, and my wife's stepmother, they concocted a, what do you call it, to get us together, my wife and I.
I was gonna ask you that next, how you met your spouse.
Okay. Well, my uncle's son turned bar mitzvah, 13 years old. So my uncle took over this kosher hotel in Bell Harbor, New York. So the Washington Hotel. And invited everybody. Now, my father-in-law's my father-in-law was a cousin, actually, of my aunt. Okay, they lived in Canada. They all came to that bar mitzvah, and so we had all the Canadians there, and we had my stepfather here. No, I'm sorry, my father-in-law here, and my stepmother, and they convinced my wife to come. She didn't want to come because she was teaching second grade specialist, and she was also working on a master's degree at Duquesne University. So my mother said to her, "Don't worry, I already took care. You have a substitute teacher, and the professor at the Duquesne University is going to keep the homework for you." So they convinced her to come. I didn't want to go either. My aunt convinced me to come, and they set us at the children's table. The oldest child was 5 years old. I would make fun of them because that 5 years old, the 2 years old today is a multi-billionaire, and the entire family in Canada became billionaires in real estate. So anyhow, we were talking. I was very impressed with my wife's English. I still speak with an accent, but can you imagine then? It was a very bad accent. My vocabulary was not too great. And my wife said, I'll call her Barbara, she said, "I cannot hear you. Why don't you come sit next to me?" And we talked, and then we decided to take a walk. There was a boardwalk in Bell Harbor, just like in Atlantic City. And we walked and we walked, and I saw that she had high heels. And I said to her, "Your feet must be killing, huh?" Excuse me. So she said, "Yeah." So we went back to the hotel. After the bar mitzvah, they went home to Pittsburgh, and she told me later on that she told her father that she met the guy she's going to marry. And sure enough, she came to visit about 2 weeks later for a Saturday. And then she went back, and within 3.5 months we were married. I moved to Pittsburgh. I was a teacher in a parochial school for 4 years. Same thing I did in Israel in the beginning. Before the military, I was a school teacher. And my mother-in-law was actually my wife's stepmother, but she raised her. Her mother died when she was 5 years old in childbirth. So she was taking sick. So my father-in-law asked me, first he asked me just to come in during the day, in the morning. Afternoon I went to Duquesne University myself, where I just about completed. I need 7 credits, but who cared? My father-in-law told her, my mother-in-law had a heart attack, and my father-in-law asked me to come and join the business. And about 10 years later, 15 years later, I actually ran the business. My father was there, but he was on the road. I turned the business into an engagement ring center. And we became the engagement ring center. On a Saturday, sometimes I sold. By then I assembled a crew. We were 10 altogether. we could sell a dozen engagement rings
In a
on a
day?
Saturday. Yeah. Today, young people are not getting married. I don't see you have an engagement, a wedding band. Do you have a wedding band? Are you married? Are you married?
Nope.
See, the jewelry business is not a good business. No, really, it's not a good business. You know, when it was good, I couldn't wait. Sunday, I couldn't wait for Monday to come. Today, I can't wait for Sunday to come. I don't go in. I'm semi-retired. I go in maybe once a week or so for a couple hours. Any more questions?
How many children do you have?
I have one child. You saw the book,
One daughter.
and she's married.
And how many children? She
And
has two
we have two children, two redheads.
I saw that.
Wait, I'll show you the picture what they look
Okay,
like today.
Yeah, please.
Because this is about 10 years old, I think. You know, so they asked the students, no, the kids, what do you like about him? And there's this girl. Yeah.
Can you face them towards me real quick?
Huh?
Can you face the pictures towards me real quick so I can get a shot? Thank you.
Now I want to show you three pictures.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Okay.
Everything you want.
First, here's the picture that appeared
Yeah, it's you.
in the newspapers. That was right after Bergen-Belsen, you know.
It looks
I
like.
don't know if you noticed, the head is big, swollen,
Yeah.
and I can't get rid of my stomach. When you starve, those are the two things
Yeah.
that remain with you.
I don't know. You're still pretty cute though.
Huh?
You're still pretty cute though. Look at that picture.
Well, I said, you know, in the military, I was the official battalion comedian. I was always very positive.
Yeah. The war held you back at all in your
Not
life.
at all. Not at all.
I like that.
None of us. My big brother today is at Hebrew University. He's retired, but he's there, research, writing books, and they call him Google. Any question, people ask him from all over the world, actually, question. Some people say that he's the giant of our generation in Judaism, you know?
Yeah.
I asked him that question, he got mad at me. But then after 10 minutes he said, one of the big ones. To guesstimate, which one am I?
The little one.
Yeah, I was gonna say I hope it's.
You know, 1956, he was actually in the same brigade that I was, but a year ahead of me, year and a half, and he was big and strong. He carried a machine gun, and he was engaged in room-to-room battle. So he opened the door with his machine gun, and somebody was sitting there with the machine gun, and they cut him in half. So he died at the age of 20. This is Paul, Moshe, and this is Yaakov, and this is my sister, Hanya, and my mother. Now this picture is after the war. I don't know exactly where it was taken. I think it was taken in Israel. You see, my father is not here anymore.
All three boys look so much alike.
The three boys?
You look like mom.
Yeah. I wanted to take one more picture. I want to take a picture of my mother when she was 16 years old.
Oh sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can see here that she was a very pretty woman,
Yeah.
you know? You see, Orthodox Jews
Right.
cover their head.
And now they wear wigs.
Yeah,
Yep.
they're wigs. One picture.
Laptop legs.
Oh wow, look at this wall of pictures.
Woo!
You see, this is
This one?
yeah, when she was 16, and this is a picture when we were married, got married. This is my daughter. you know,
Right.
without a passport. So finally he allowed this picture to be taken. But you had to be, first of all, you had to be from a wealthy family
Yeah.
to have this.
She looked like she's dressed that way.
So here's Jacob got killed. You see him in his,
Okay.
you see him in his military thing. Now if you can take some pictures,
Daughter?
these are my, it's when I was a soldier.
Oh, okay.
You see
Let
the
me-
parachute?
Oh yeah.
That's crazy.
They took picture of everybody, and they, even though you cannot see,
Yeah.
here I am
Uh-huh.
as a soldier,
That's great.
and here I look like on the post office someplace. You know?
This is great.
Huh?
This is great.
Yeah.
Like it.
That was my wife's idea to put that one. This is
To put up all the pictures.
memorial wall.
Thank you.
I'll put it back up. I really like this picture. I mean, you look, obviously you look ill, but you look happy.
Yeah, I was here.
Yeah.
I was. It's the only picture I have of my father. To seminary with him, but he shared the room with him. He said, "Your father was the Ilui, which means a finna. He was the smartest in the entire yeshiva. So your uncle, his brother, was a dumbbell." That's what he told me. This goes here. It was traditional in Hungary that the smartest one in the seminary got the rich girl. You know?
Does this one go here?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how it worked. That's how it worked. My mother was really unusual. You know, my grandfather, actually my great-grandfather, was a rancher, you know, the big ranch,
Okay, yeah.
raised horses. He collected taxes. So, so she married, when she came of age, she married a gentleman, my grandfather, whose father was also a tax collector. So they kept the money in the families, you know. So anyhow, he was a wholesaler. He was an entrepreneur. He was in and out of businesses, made money, got into something else all the time, even though he was an Orthodox Jew. Now he was in this wholesale business where he was supplying to stores throughout the city, and anti-Semitism in Hungary was terrible, always, for 1700 years. Now Jews, they kept kicking him out of Hungary for almost 1800 years, and whenever the economy went down, they called them back. So there was this client at the store who was especially anti-Semitic. And my grandfather was afraid, actually, to go to the store to collect, because he owed money. So he sent my mother. She was 12, 13 years old. And she walked into the store with her hands behind her back, and she looked at the shelves, and the guy kept raving and ranting. He knew who she was, with his anti-Semitism and everything like that. She didn't pay any attention to him. And she said, "You know, your shelves are preloaded. You really don't need anything. But you know, you're going to have some customers today. They'll buy some. Tomorrow you'll have some more. They'll buy some. Pretty soon you're not going to have anything on your shelves. You think my father is going to send you one more penger, you know, the Hungarian coin?" She came home with the money. she was not afraid. She knew no fear. And to some degree, I inherited some of it. You know, I always say, people ask me, what are you afraid of, Judah? I says, to open my checkbook.
Judah, can we come back in here?
And since the camp was inundated with lice all over the place, my mother talked us into eating the lice. In the beginning it was a little tough, but after a while we were looking for the lice. And you didn't have to look very far, they were all over the place. But lice does something else, they carry diseases. And the lice bit me in the back of my head. I don't know if you could take a picture of it later on. There is a gouge there.
Maybe if you just turned around.
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
I will. So anyhow, you know, pain didn't matter because you were hungry. You didn't feel any pain. But it came to a point where my headache was so bad. So finally I said to my mother, I have a headache. She checked my head in the back. She saw there was a big swell, an abscess. You know what an abscess is?
Mm-hmm.
It's pus, you know, right here. And luckily there was a physician in our barrack. And what does the physician carry with him when he was asked to leave in Debrecen? He carried this satchel with him, the black satchel. See, those days you didn't go to an emergency room or hospital. There was nothing like that. There was a doctor and he came to you. So he checked and he said the abscess was very, very bad. In fact, he said, I can't understand how he's still alive. He should be dead. He says the pus went through the skull, that he'll actually have to cut out a circle around it in the skull. And he said to my mother that, you know, he apologized. He said, I don't have anything to put him to sleep, so you'll have to hold him tight so he wouldn't move when I cut the skull. So when he finished, he showed us a metallic dish the size of a cereal bowl, was filled with pus all the way to the top. He said he managed to clean everything, he hoped, and he put, the only thing he had is gas, he covered it, and again apologized, said he has nothing against pain, and no pills, that I'll be in a great deal of pain. So my mother took me back to the barrack after she thanked him, and I said, you know, when you are so hungry, what is a little headache? You just don't feel it. I don't remember having a lot of pain. So I imagine I had a lot of pain, but as I said, the hunger was so much greater that it kind of overtook. So I don't know if you can see anything here.
I've
Here,
noticed it.
just put.
Oh, yeah. I
Can,
think,
can you see anything?
yeah, if you turn around and then like maybe angle your head down a little bit, I'll be like, okay.
Yeah,
It's about, what is it, 2.5 inches, 3 inches
yeah, it's,
long and about an inch. So it never fused back perfectly. It never does.
Wow. Can you lean your head forward a little bit more? Tilt your chin down. Yeah, perfect. Wow. You didn't feel that?
I don't remember feeling it. I know that when I came back, my mother gave me a teaspoonful of jelly,
Uh-huh.
and that was it came actually from the Red Cross came to the camp, and they left all kinds of packages with food, but of course we never saw it. The Germans took it all. The only thing they gave us, little jars of jello, stuff like that.
Can you reach back with your left hand and like touch it again? Just to like, so like, yeah. A little bit lower with your fingers. Okay. Perfect.
Maybe I should have had another haircut. Yeah. You have more questions?
no, that's all my questions.
All right,
think-
I just want to tell you about my stepfather.
Yeah,
My stepfather, my mother married this gentleman after the war. And he was a very, very handsome guy, Hollywood. Look, he was so handsome. But he never talked. He adored my mother. It was not difficult because my mother was actually intellectually, she was about 2 grades above him, maybe 3. Not that he was stupid, you know, but he was not learned.
Yeah.
And my mother went to gymnasium.
Right.
Gymnasium in Hungary was like 2-3-year college here.
Right.
And and he was full with rage, and unfortunately he took it out on my brother, Isaac, the younger brother, who's damaged till today. He couldn't help it. You know, we tried to protect him, but I was away in the military, my brothers were away, my other brother was at the university, and Yakov died, so anyhow, we started to wonder that maybe he was a part of the Judenrat. It was one of those, you know, many of them after the war were hunted down and killed.
Yeah.
So we were wondering about it. My mother wanted to leave him, and I held her back. I said, he has a very good heart. You know, he was really his heart was very good, but it was crazy. So anyhow, my parents lived in Tel Aviv at the time, my mother and her husband, and my grandfather lived in Jerusalem. On one of their trips to Jerusalem to visit him, they walked up King George Street. There's a steep hill there, and they went by this restaurant that had some kind of a celebration in there. It was very boisterous and dancing and singing, and there were just 2-3 guys at the door, you know, smoking a cigarette, and they also had glasses. And as they passed, one of them said, "Morris Schwartz." Morris Schwartz. And my stepfather turned around, didn't recognize him, kept going. So they get Morris Schwartz a little louder. So my mother said to him, "Aren't you interested to know who these people are? They seem to know you." So he went back and he apologized. "I'm sorry, guys, I don't know who you are." And they said, "You don't know us, but we know you. So because of you, we are here today." How's that? You see, when the Nazis came to my stepfather's town, he lived in Romania. The Hungarian side used to be Hungary, but now after the First World War, became Romania. He was a baker. He had a big wholesale bakery that supplied the entire town. And he sold everything, and he gave it to his neighbor and said, "Hide my kids, 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. And after the war, I'll come back." And sure enough, you know, everybody